The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds.
Hello, my name is Mr. Gru, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Chapter 17. It is one of my very favorite chapters, and this one is called The Thunderchild, which is foreshadowing what will happen at the end of the chapter, which is very big and very exciting.
17. The Thunderchild. Had the Martians aimed only at destruction, they might, on Monday, have annihilated the entire population of London, as it spread itself slowly through the home counties. Not only along the road through Barnet, but also through Edgware and Waltham Abbey, and along the roads eastward to Southend and Shrewsbury-Ness, and south of the Thames to Deal and Broadstairs, poured the same frantic rout. If one could have hung that June morning in a balloon, in the blazing blue above London, every northward and eastward road, running out of the tangled maze of streets, would have seemed stipple black with the streaming fugitives, each dot a human agony of terror and physical distress. I have set forth at length in the last chapter my brother's account of the road through Chipping Barnet, in order that my readers may realize how that swarming of black dots appear to one of those concerned.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about this section we have just read. So, what we have here is more proper nouns, which is a language technique referring to Barnet, Edgware, and Waltham Abbey, and Shrewsbury-Ness, and all the other places which will be annihilated by the laser beam. No, not the laser beam, by the Martians with the heat ray in the Thunderchild chapter. So, we have the proper nouns, which makes it very real and very exciting. But we also have something else. Let me just find it a second here. Yes, we have something else. We have the dehumanization of the people of the Londoners here, because we have the little black dots. These are the people of London who are being annihilated, but they are also running away from London, and they're made to seem very small and very insignificant, like my minions.
Never before, in the history of the world, had such a mass of human beings moved and suffered together. The legendary hosts of Goths and Huns, the hugest armies Asia has ever seen, would have been but a drop in that current. And this was no disciplined march. It was a stampede gigantic and terrible. Without order, without a goal, 6 million people, unarmed and unprovisioned, driving headlong. It was the beginning of the rout of civilization, of the massacre of mankind. Directly below him, the balloonist would have seen the network of streets, far and wide, houses, churches, squares, crescents, gardens, already derelict, spread out like a huge map, and in the southward, blotted.
So here we have a couple of things. We have the focus on perspective, because he likes us to think in different perspectives. He likes us to think of being in a balloon, looking down and seeing the tiny black dots. So you remember he used his brother to give us a different perspective. I too have a brother, but we don't get on so well. But he goes his brother to give a different perspective of London, and here he wants us to imagine looking down from a hot air balloon, or nowadays we use a drone footage to look down upon London. And look at this, he has a synthetic list. Look, he has an asynthetic list, a network of streets, houses, churches, squares, crescents, gardens. This is an asynthetic list to suggest the sheer wideness and the scope of the Martian invasion. And of course, as you know, this is a structural point.
Over Ealing, Richmond, Wimbledon, it would have seemed as if some monstrous pen had flung ink upon the chart.
Again, off he is with these asynthetic lists of these places, proper nouns used in an asynthetic list. Ealing, Richmond, Wimbledon. It would have seemed as if some monstrous pen had flung ink upon the chart, as he used a simile as well. So we have structure in the shape of the asynthetic list, but we also have the proper nouns, which is a language point, and we also have the simile, which is a language point. So this is showing the mess that the Martians are making of the West London Surrey landscape.
Steadily, incessantly, each black splash grew and spread, shooting out ramifications this way and that, now banking itself against rising ground, now pouring swiftly over a crest into a new-found valley, exactly as a gout of ink would spread itself upon blotting paper.
So what we have here is an extended simile. This is not just one example of the simile. He's using it again and again. And this is the black smoke as it spreads out in the way the black ink would spread across the paper, so on the blotting paper. So we have an extended simile. This is a language point. You must write it down.
And beyond, over the blue hills that rise southward of the river, the glittering Martians went to and fro, calmly and methodically, spreading their poison cloud over this patch of country and then over that, laying it again with their steam jets when it had served its purpose, and taking possession of the conquered country. They did not seem to have aimed at extermination so much as at complete demoralization and the destruction of any opposition. They exploded any stores of powder they came upon, cut every telegraph, and wrecked the railway here and there. They were hamstringing mankind.
This is, of course, a metaphor. Hamstringing, this is how you disable a person, a man or a woman, but he's using a metaphor to describe how the Martians are disabling the country by debilitating the hamstring or the central core of the infrastructure of England at the time. This is a language point because it is a metaphor.
They seemed in no hurry to extend the field of their operations, and did not come beyond the central part of London all that day. It is possible that a very considerable number of people in London stuck to their houses through Monday morning. Certain it is that many died at home, suffocated by the black smoke.
Here we have hyperbaton, which is the language technique to reverse the word order. Certain it is that many died at home. We would say it is certain, but he says certain it is, so it's hyperbaton, which gives it more gravity, puts the emphasis on the word certain, which makes it more emphasis and more drama and more excitement. So this is a language technique, hyperbaton, which is Hyper, 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 Hyperbaton, hyperbaton. That's how you spell hyperbaton. Here we go, you're welcome.
Until about midday, the Pool of London was an astonishing scene. Steamboats and shipping of all sorts lay there, tempted by the enormous sums of money offered by fugitives. And it is said that many who swam out to these vessels were thrust off with boathooks and drowned. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the thinning remnant of a cloud of black vapour appeared between the arches of Blackfriars Bridge. At that, the pool became a scene of mad confusion, fighting and collision, and for some time a multitude of boats and barges jammed in the northern arch of the Tower Bridge, and the sailors and lightermen had to fight savagely against the people who swarmed upon them from the riverfront. People were actually clambering down the piers of the bridge from above.
So here we can see the way in which humanity is turning in upon itself. This is not just the Martians, this is a problem with humanity. It's the people who are causing the most problem. They are fighting each other in the streets. It is brilliant if you are a supervillain like me. So this is what they were doing. This is not a language point as such, but it's just a thematic point because the people are the problem. Not just the Martians, the people are the problem.
When, an hour later, a Martian appeared beyond the clock tower and waded down the river, nothing but wreckage floated above Limehouse.
We'll just make another point here. We're based in central London, out towards the East End. So Limehouse is an area of London towards the East End. The pool which they speak about is this area where the ships are, the water basin as the beginning of the estuary that leads out to the sea. This is an exodus to get out of the city in the boats, and it is chaos. It's a chaos scene. And now we have to remember that this is in London because we have the brothers' perspective. So we're back seeing the narrative happening through the brothers' perspective, and H.G. Wells gives us that perspective to let us know how it is in the capital, which is a very, very big, very important place. Makes it real, makes it frightening for people who read it.
Of the falling of the fifth cylinder, I have presently to tell. The sixth star fell at Wimbledon.
I must stop it again to explain to you about the perspective and the time shifts here in the narrative. So we have of the falling of the fifth cylinder. I have presently to tell. This is like the sort of supervillain plan that even I would have for capturing the moon. And here we have the cylinder coming down. Now, the important thing for you to write down is that the structure here is non-chronological. It's non-chronological because he's yet to tell us about the falling of the fifth cylinder. And yet he skipped to the sixth cylinder which fell at Wimbledon because that's where his brother is near, so we can talk about the London experience. So he's skipping a little bit of time here. He's shifting the narrative, shifting the time in the narrative. It's a structural technique, and what it does is it reminds the reader that this is very real and this has already happened, and he's now relating the events in the way in which he feels best to do so. So it gives it authenticity and realism.
My brother, keeping watch beside the women in the chaise in the meadow, saw the green flash of it far beyond the hills. On Tuesday, the little party, still set upon getting across the sea, made its way through the swarming country towards Colchester. The news that the Martians were now in possession of the whole of London was confirmed. They had been seen at Highgate, and even, it was said, at Neasden.
Just returning to the top of the page, the green flash is a language technique. I forgot to speak. I forgot how to even speak. A language technique is called a synecdoche because the little green flash represents something very big, much bigger than just a flash. It represents the whole of the Martian invasion. This is the sixth cylinder, so it's synecdoche. 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 I can spell and you can spell and we can all spell together. Going a little bit crazy with lockdown, I'm afraid. Hopefully you stay with me. Okay, let's carry on.
But they did not come into my brother's view until the morrow. That day the scattered multitudes began to realize the urgent need of provisions. As they grew hungry, the rights of property ceased to be regarded. Farmers were out to defend their cattle sheds, granaries, and ripening root crops with arms in their hands. A number of people now, like my brother, had their faces eastward, and there were some desperate souls even going back towards London to get food. These were chiefly people from the northern suburbs, whose knowledge of the Black Smoke came by hearsay. He heard that about half the members of the government had gathered at Birmingham, and that enormous quantities of high explosives were being prepared to be used in automatic mines across the Midland counties. He was also told that the Midland Railway Company had replaced the desertions of the first day's panic, had resumed traffic, and was running northward trains from St. Albans to relieve the congestion of the home counties. There was also a placard in Chipping Ongar announcing that large stores of flour were available in the northern towns, and that within 24 hours bread would be distributed among the starving people in the neighborhood. But this intelligence did not deter him from the plan of escape he had formed, and the three pressed eastward all day, and heard no more of the bread distribution than this promise. Nor, as a matter of fact, did anyone else hear more of it. That night fell the 7th star, falling upon Primrose Hill. It fell while Miss Elphinstone was watching, for she took that duty alternately with my brother. She saw it.
We're back with Miss Elphinstone, we're back with the brother. This is a characterization technique, which I guess technically comes under the umbrella term of structure, but really it is a separate issue. It is characterization. Notice that she, Miss Elphinstone, the younger sister of the doctor, is taking turns with the brother to watch, taking duty to watch out in the night sky. So she is very active, she is a very willing participant in taking a stand against the Martian invasion, very much unlike her sister-in-law, Mrs. Elphinstone, who is represented as being a little bit ineffective, a little bit like some of the other characters we have met, such as the curate.
On Wednesday, the three fugitives, they had passed the night in a field of unripe wheat, reached Chelmsford. And there a body of inhabitants, calling itself the Committee of Public Supply, seized the pony as provisions and would give nothing in exchange for it but the promise of a share in it the next day. Here there were rumours of Martians at Epping, and news of the destruction of Waltham Abbey powder mills, in a vain attempt to blow up one of the invaders. People were watching for Martians here from the church towers. My brother, very luckily for him as it chanced, preferred to push on at once to the coast rather than wait for food, although all three of them were very hungry.
Just a very quick character point again here, characterization. These are practical people. The brother is very logical and practical. You may compare this with some of the less practical characters such as the curate and in some regards the artilleryman. So you have a very, very practical scientific mind. He doesn't want to stop for food. He knows that the biggest priority is to escape and get further east, which is exactly what they continue to do.
By midday they passed through Tillingham, which, strangely enough, seemed to be quite silent and deserted, save for a few furtive plunderers hunting for food. Near Tillingham, they suddenly came in sight of the sea, and the most amazing crowd of shipping of all sorts that it is possible to imagine.
I hope very much that you are looking at a map. As you're reading this book, you can see the journey that they are taking as they go east towards the sea. You need to visualize, you need to see these places. Yes, they are proper nouns. Tillingham is a proper noun. It's a real place. And that gives it authenticity. It makes it real. It makes it very frightening for a contemporary reader and a little bit frightening even for a modern reader such as ourselves.
For after the sailors could no longer come up the Thames, they came on to the Essex coast, to Harwich and Walton and Clacton, and afterwards to Foulness and Shoebury, to bring off the people. They lay in a huge sickle-shaped curve that vanished into the mist at last towards the Naze. Close inshore was a multitude of fishing smacks, English, Scotch, French, Dutch, and Swedish, steam launches from the Thames, yachts, electric boats, and beyond were ships of large burden, a multitude of filthy colliers, trim merchantmen, cattle ships, passenger boats, petroleum tanks, ocean tramps, an old white transport even, neat white and grey liners from Southampton and Hamburg, and along the blue coast across the Blackwater, my brother could make out dimly a dense swarm of boats chaffering with the people on the beach. A swarm which also extended up the Blackwater, almost to Malden.
So here we have plenty of asymptotic lists to emphasize the amount of people and movement and chaos and the determined attempts to leave the country via the boats and the ships. And so all these asymptotic lists just give us an overwhelming sense of how fast and how dynamic the motion is and the chaos is, and also the opportunity, because these ship owners and cruise liners, they are there ready to take people at a very, very high price.
About a couple of miles out lay an ironclad, very low in the water, almost to my brother's perception, like a waterlogged ship. This was the ram Thunderchild.
And there we have it, the anaphoric reference, which is a structural point back to the title of the chapter. So this is anaphoric, it's linking back to the title of the chapter, which in itself was foreshadowing what's going to happen with the Thunderchild. It is a warship, it is an ironclad, so heavily defended, iron-made ship designed to fight in wars. So very, very powerful ship. Therefore, the drama has increased, the tension has increased. Maybe the warship will have a chance of success. Remember, we're in the middle section of the whole book, but we're in the very last chapter of the first section, the first book, the first volume. This is the final chapter, so it has a very, very climactic feel. This is a structural point which you will want to write down.
It was the only warship in sight, but far away to the right, over the smooth surface of the sea, for that day there was a dead calm, lay a serpent of black smoke to mark the next ironclads of the Channel Fleet, which hovered in an extended line, steam up and ready for action, across the Thames estuary during the course of the Martian conquest, vigilant and yet powerless to prevent it. At the sight of the sea, Mrs. Elphinstone, in spite of the assurances of her sister-in-law, gave way to panic.
Of course she did, because we know her character is described and characterized as being very weak and very, very, what is the word? How do you say in English? It's very weak-minded and very, very panic-stricken, I think I would describe, unlike the other two characters, unlike the brother and Miss Elphinstone. So you need to look at the two female characters as a foil. You've got the younger character, Miss Elphinstone, very strong-minded, very powerful, very confident, and yet you have the older lady, Mrs. Elphinstone, who is very silly in some respects. Although she represents most people's similar attitudes, we all would be very silly because it will be very frightening.
She had never been out of England before. She would rather die than trust herself friendless in a foreign country, and so forth. She seemed, poor woman, to imagine that the French and the Martians might prove very similar.
This is a very silly point, isn't it? Makes her seem a ridiculous character. And yet, here, this is H.G. Wells poking fun a little bit at the xenophobia of Britain at the time. Now, remember that Britain and France had been in many, many wars. This is before World War I, in which England and France were allies. If you go back centuries and centuries, France and England had been at war for many, many years. So this is understandable xenophobia toward the French. And you have to remember that the British Empire, very powerful at the time, a huge empire, and so very xenophobic and mistrusting of foreigners. And here you have that here. So it could represent the feelings of the people at the time, or it could be H.G. Wells poking fun at the feelings at the time. A little bit of satire from H.G. Wells. We know he loves his satire. He loves it. And so we have a bit of context for you there. You're very welcome.
She had been growing increasingly hysterical, fearful, and depressed during the 2 days' journeyings.
You have an asymptotic list there to represent just how restless she has been growing over the course of the journey. So the asymptotic list is a structural point just to emphasize her change in character and also the way she represents most people's fears of the time.
Her great idea was to return to Stanmore. Things had always been well and safe at Stanmore. They would find George at Stanmore.
Oh, this is fantastic. This is a language technique. It is called, no, not a language, this is structure technique. Put that different color highlighter pen down. This is structure technique. It is called epistrophe. It's like apostrophe, but it's epistrophe. I am very sorry if the team's notifications are keep pinging in your ears, like they're pinging in my ears. They are very irritating. But anyway, that is one of the symptoms of home learning and the homeschool. There we go. So, epistrophe, like apostrophe, but with epistrophe. So E-P-I-S-T-R-O-P-H-E. I'll say it again a little bit slower, shall I? E-P-I-S-T-R-O-P-H-E. Epistrophe. And what this means is the repetition of the word at the end of successive clauses. So you have the word Stanmore is used 3 times. So her great idea was to return to Stanmore. 1. Things had always been well and safe at Stanmore. 2. They would find George at Stanmore. There's 3. So you actually have a triadic structure as well. Triadic structure. T-R-I-A-D-I-C. Triadic structure. And what that does is it shows the repetitiveness of Mrs. Elphinstone, her limited mindset. So H.G. Wells is using structure here to help build characterization because she is unstable. I know how she feels. She is unstable. And maybe she's been locked down too. Who knows? But the repetition of Stanmore shows how limited she is. She cannot see beyond Stanmore. She just thinks she wants to go back home to her husband and he'll make everything all better again. But of course we know this is not true, so we have dramatic irony because we as the reader know far more than this because we have had the benefit of perspective and we've seen from the narrator's perspective how terrible the events are and how big the risk is. So, epistrophe, triadic structure, and dramatic irony, all helping to build a sense of characterization and how limited and ineffective Mrs. Elphinstone is.
It was with the greatest difficulty they could get her down to the beach, where, presently, my brother succeeded in attracting the attention of some men on a paddle steamer from the Thames. They sent a boat and drove a bargain for £36 for the 3. The steamer was going, these men said, to Ostend. It was about 2 o'clock when my brother, having paid their fares at the gangway, found himself safely aboard the steamboat with his charges. There was food aboard, albeit at exorbitant prices, and the 3 of them contrived to eat a meal on one of the seats forward. There were already a couple of score of passengers aboard, some of whom had expended their last money in securing a passage. But the captain lay off the Blackwater until 5 in the afternoon, picking up passengers until the seated decks were even dangerously crowded. He would probably have remained longer had it not been for the sound of guns that began about that hour in the south. As if in answer, the ironclad seaward fired a small gun and hoisted a string of flags. A jet of smoke sprang out of her funnels.
This is the very interesting point H.G. Wells is making as a socialist, because he's saying that even in the most dire of situations, even the most chaotic situations, or maybe because of the chaotic situations, people will always try to make money. So these boat and ship owners, they are charging exorbitant prices to get onto the boat and charging exorbitant prices to eat food on the boats, and also they're waiting much too long to fill the boats up before they leave. They want to go to Ostend across the channel, but they want to get the boat full, dangerously full of people, because they want the money. So this is about human behavior in the face of crisis, and we only have to look around at this time and during lockdown to see some people behaving in the same way. We know from the supermarkets and some of the behavior. Anyway, we won't go into that because that's all done with now.
Some of the passengers were of the opinion that this firing came from Shoeburyness, until it was noticed that it was growing louder. At the same time, far away in the southeast, the masts of the upper works of the 3 ironclads rose, one after the other out of the sea, beneath clouds of black smoke. But my brother's attention speedily reverted to the distant firing in the south. He fancied he saw a column of smoke rising out of the distant grey haze. The little steamer was already flapping her way eastward of the big crescent of shipping, and the low Essex coast was growing blue and hazy when a Martian appeared, small and faint in the remote distance, advancing along the muddy coast from the direction of Foulness. At that, the captain on the bridge swore at the top of his voice with fear and anger at his own delay, and the paddles seemed infected with his terror.
Just to emphasize that anger and terror, you have the hendiadys there of fear and anger, which is 5 lines down on page 109. Fear and anger, these mean the same thing. These are same emotions here. It's hendiadys, Hendiadys. Spells hendiadys, and if we had the spelling bee, it will be in the spelling bee.
Every soul aboard stood at the bulwarks or on the seats of the steamer and stared at the distant shape, higher than the trees or church towers inland, and advancing with a leisurely parody of a human stride. It was the first Martian my brother had seen, and he stood more amazed than terrified, watching this Titan advancing deliberately towards the shipping, wading further and further into the water as the coast fell away. Then, far away beyond the crouch, came another, striding over some stunted trees, and then yet another, still further off, wading deeply through the shiny mudflat that seemed to hang halfway up between sea and sky. They were all stalking seaward, as if to intercept the escape of the multitudinous vessels that were crowded between Foulness and the Naze.
Again, I hope you are looking at the map as you're reading this so you can see exactly where this is taking place, just on the east coast of England. Now you have incrementum, a structural technique, incrementum here, because more and more of the how do they call it, the Martian machines are approaching the coastline. So you have incrementum, more fear, more drama. Will the ship escape? Will they get to Ostend? Will they get out of range of the heat ray? We have to read. It's a real page turner. It's climactic. So you have the structural technique of climax as well in this final chapter of book 1.
In spite of the throbbing exertions of the engines of the little paddle boat, and the pouring foam that her wheels flung behind her, she receded with terrifying slowness from this ominous advance. Glancing northwestward, my brother saw the large crescent of shipping already writhing with the approaching terror. One ship passing behind another coming round from broadside to end on, steamships whistling and giving off volumes of steam, sails being let out, launches rushing hither and thither. He was so fascinated by this, and by the creeping danger away to the left, that he had no eyes for anything seaward. And then, a swift movement of the steamboat, she had suddenly come round to avoid being run down, flung him headlong from the seat upon which he was standing. There was a shouting all about him, a trampling of feet, and a cheer that seemed to be answered faintly. The steamboat lurched and rolled him over upon his hands. He sprang to his feet and saw to starboard, and not 100 yards from their heeling, pitching boat, a vast iron bulk, like the blade of a plough tearing through the water, tossing it on either side in huge waves of foam that leapt towards the steamer, flinging her paddles helplessly in the air, and then sucking her deck down almost to the waterline.
Oh, it's very exciting, isn't it? Very tense and very dramatic. The Thunderchild has been described in very magnificent terms. So you have the description here. This is language. You have a vast iron bulk, like the blade of a plow. So you have the adjectives to describe the vast iron bulk, and then you also have the simile, like the blade of a plow. It sounds very powerful and very, very aggressive. And so we think this has a good chance to defeat the Martians. This seems like the best thing that the army have produced so far. It's very tense and very dramatic. This is all to build to that sense of climax. So you have the structural technique of climax and dramatic tension at this final chapter of the first book.
A douche of spray blinded my brother for a moment. When his eyes were clear again, he saw the monster had passed and was rushing landward. Big iron upperworks rose out of this headlong structure, and from that, twin funnels projected and spat a smoking blast, shot with fire. It was the torpedo ram Thunderchild, steaming headlong, coming to the rescue of the threatened shipping.
Just look at the language that is described with here. So you have the monster, which is a metaphor. So it's described as a monster ship. You have the verbs rushing, projected, spat, steaming, headlong. So you have these verbs which are described, quite aggressive verbs, spat and rushing, and these are very dynamic, very powerful verbs. And then you have, let's look at the semantic field here. You have the semantic field of fighting and war. You have the word blast, shot, fire, torpedo ram, rescue, threaten, even the word spat as well. So you have lots of words in that paragraph wrapped up with dramatic tension. Very exciting, very powerful for this point of the book.
Keeping his footing on the heaving deck by clutching the bulwarks, my brother looked past this charging Leviathan at the Martians again.
Just a quick point about another metaphor there, Leviathan. As you may know from your mythology, this is like a giant sea serpent, very frightening. So it's another metaphor to describe the ironclad, the Thunderchild, as being like a mythical creature, a sea serpent, very dangerous, very powerful, but also very, very exciting.
And he saw the three of them now close together and standing so far out to sea that their tripod supports were almost entirely submerged. Thus, sunken and seen in remote perspective, they appeared far less formidable than the huge iron bulk in whose wake the steamer was pitching so helplessly. It would seem they were regarding this new antagonist with astonishment. To their intelligence, it may be, the giant was even such another as themselves. The Thunderchild fired no gun, but simply drove full speed towards them. It was probably her not firing that enabled her to get so near the enemy as she did. They did not know what to make of her. One shell, and they would have sent her to the bottom forthwith with the heat ray. She was steaming at such a pace that in a minute she seemed halfway between the steamboat and the Martians, a diminishing black bulk against the receding horizontal expanse of the Essex coast. Suddenly the foremost Martian lowered his tube and discharged a canister of the black gas at the ironclad. It hit her larboard side and glanced off in an inky jet that rolled away to seaward, an unfolding torrent of black smoke, from which the ironclad drove clear. To the watchers from the steamer, low in the water and with the sun in their eyes, it seemed as though she were already among the Martians. They saw the gaunt figures separating and rising out of the water as they retreated shoreward, and one of them raised the camera-like generator of the heat ray. He held it, pointing obliquely downward, and a bank of steam sprang from the water at its touch. It must have driven through the iron of the ship's side like a white-hot iron rod through paper.
And here we have a language technique of simile to describe how the Martian heat ray is as powerful, ripping through the side of the ironclad. The ironclad, the Thunderchild, which we've just heard how powerful and how like mythical the thing is, and yet here the heat ray tears through the side of it like a hot iron rod would tear through paper. So the simile, the language, it is an anticlimax because we've just built up, or H.G. Wells has just built up the power of the Thunderchild, and yet here we have it being brought back down to earth or to sea with such ease and simplicity, which shows how powerful the Martians are. So very climactic, very frightening, very dramatic, and yet anticlimactic too, because the Martians have the upper hand. Even still, we thought just for a moment that the Thunderchild would be powerful enough to destroy them, but no.
A flicker of flame went up through the rising steam, and then the Martian reeled and staggered. In another moment, he was cut down. A great body of water and steam shot high in the air. The guns of the Thunderchild sounded through the reek, going off one after the other, and one shot splashed the water high close by the steamer, ricocheted towards the other flying ships to the north, and smashed a smack to matchwood. But no one heeded that very much. At the sight of the Martian's collapse, the captain on the bridge yelled inarticulately, and all the crowding passengers on the steamer's stern shouted together. And then they yelled again, for surging out beyond the white tumult drove something long and black, the flames steaming from its middle parts in ventilators and funnels spouting fire. She was still alive.
I don't know if in your copy of the book it says she was alive still, and yet the narrator here, he reads it, she was still alive. Well, you can forgive the reader because this is another example of hyperbaton, where H.G. Wells has reversed the subject and verb order to say she was alive still. Now, what he means to do here is he wants to emphasize the word alive, so he puts it at the beginning, she was alive still. So hyperbaton is used there to emphasize and push the word alive. Now, this is a language technique. No, it is not. It's a structure technique, because it's the order, the sequence of the words. Structure technique. Sorry about that. And it is used to push the word alive, because from the depths of despair, the Thunderchild, the warship is back and is going to take down another Martian. Very exciting, very tense, very dramatic.
The steering gear, it seems, was intact, and her engines working. She headed straight for a second Martian, and was within 100 yards of him when the heat ray came to bear. Then, with a violent thud, a blinding flash, her decks, her funnels leapt upward. The Martian staggered with the violence of her explosion, and in another moment, the flaming wreckage, still driving forward with the impetus of its pace, had struck him and crumpled him up like a thing of cardboard. My brother shouted involuntarily. A boiling tumult of steam hid everything again. "Two!" yelled the captain. Everyone was shouting. The whole steamer from end to end rang with frantic cheering, that was taken up first by one and then by all in the crowding multitude of ships and boats that was driving out to sea.
And the use of direct speech here, the captain saying, "Two, two." This is making it more realistic, and it puts the reader in the middle of the action. So by direct speech, which is a structural technique, it puts the reader in the middle of the action and makes it even more real and even more dramatic.
The steam hung upon the water for many minutes, hiding the third Martian and the coast altogether. And all this time, the boat was paddling steadily out to sea and away from the fight. And when at last the confusion cleared, the drifting bank of black vapor intervened, and nothing of the Thunderchild could be made out, nor could the third Martian be seen. But the ironclads to seaward were now quite close, and standing in toward shore past the steamboat. The little vessel continued to beat its way seaward, and the ironclads receding slowly towards the coast, which was hidden still by a marbled bank of vapor, part steam, part black gas, eddying and combining in the strangest ways. The fleet of refugees was scattering to the northeast. Several smacks were sailing between the ironclads and the steamboat. After a time, before they reached the sinking cloud bank, the warships turned northward, and then abruptly went about and passed into the thickening haze of evening southward. The coast grew faint, and at last indistinguishable amid the low banks of clouds that were gathering about the sinking sun. Then, suddenly, out of the golden haze of the sunset came the vibration of guns and a form of black shadows moving. Everyone struggled to the rail of the steamer and peered into the blinding furnace of the west, but nothing was to be distinguished clearly. A mass of smoke rose slantingly and barred the face of the sun. The steamboat throbbed on its way through an interminable suspense. The sun sank into grey clouds. The sky flushed and darkened. The evening star trembled into sight. It was deep twilight when the captain cried out and pointed. My brother strained his eyes. Something rushed up into the sky out of the greyness, rushed slantingly upward and very swiftly into the luminous clearness above the clouds in the western sky. Something flat and broad and very large that swept round in a vast curve, grew smaller, sank slowly, and vanished again into the grey mystery of the night. And as it flew, it rained down darkness upon the land.
So a couple of things to say just to finish off this chapter and finish off book one. We have the use of sun is important here as a symbol. We've met the symbol of the sun before. Normally the sunrise representing an optimistic new day, but H.G. Wells sort of undermining that with very dark and very sinister things happening. And here you have the opposite. You have sunset. It sounds quite romantic in some respects, very beautiful, but actually, of course, this is a very devastating scene. So you could see the sunset as being the sun setting on humanity. It could be symbolic to suggest that actually humanity's days are numbered, and the dying of the day, the dying of the sun on each day represents the sort of the life of the humanity coming to an end as well, if that makes sense. Now this is a language point because it is symbolism of the sun. So that is one thing we can say. The very last phrase, which is marked with a footnote number 8, as it flew, it rained down darkness upon the land. Well, this is taken from Genesis, from the Old Testament, and it's about God's destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, punishing the people for their sins. And so this is a link back to religion, it's a link back to the curate, and it feels like the Martians are punishing humanity for their sins, possibly. Or is it an act of God? So it's raising those theological questions. And what else did I want to say? Oh yes, and then this strange thing that flies up from the earth and swirls around in a curve and goes back down again. This seems to be some sort of flying machine that the Martians have created. This is a new machine which we've not yet met. So this is, let's bear in mind, in 1896, 97, 98, when this was published, there were no flying machines. Planes were not invented. And yet H.G. Wells here has invented something. He's concocted something. He's very prophetic. He predicts the future very accurately. So this is also very frightening. So we've seen that the warships, the ironclads, the Thunderchild has had some advantage, but ultimately we get a real sense here that the humanity's days are numbered, that even though some have escaped, this is looking very, very bleak for humanity at this time. So very important. Now I'd like to close the book by putting your finger in the middle or your thumb, and you'll see we're just over halfway through the book. We're about maybe even 2/3 of the way through the book, and what that tells us is that this is a real turning point. This is the central section of the book. It's pivotal, it's structural. Which way will it go? It feels very much like the Martians will win, and yet of course, as we know, having read the book, that is not what happens. But at this point, structurally, it feels very, very much on a knife edge. It could go either way, like a seesaw. So I will leave you with that thought for the end of this chapter and the end of this book, and then we'll start book 2 next time. Goodbye.